Hello, my name's Louise and I'm a registered dietitian. I understand we lead really busy lives and we spend a lot of time on our screens. So in this video, I'm going to give you an overview of what sustainable eating is and in a bite-sized amount. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll really understand how you can adapt your meals and eating habits to be more sustainable and healthy. So, what do we mean by a sustainable diet or sustainable foods? Well, ultimately, every product and every food has an environmental footprint, and we can see an image here of a footprint and all the different things that go into making up the carbon intensity or environmental footprint of the product or food. And the interesting thing for food and diet is that when we think about what we eat or how we eat impacts the environment, a huge amount of it, nearly a quarter, is attributed to food waste. So before we need to think about worrying about cutting animal products or shifting the way we eat, I'd say one of the most key things you could do is actually try to ensure that none of the food is thrown away or wasted. If you can compost food waste, great. If you can cook creatively with leftovers, that's even better. Getting to know your food labels and labelling so that you eat the perishable foods first and leave the food with a longer shelf life towards the end of the shopping week. All those kind of things can really help reduce food waste and reduce the environmental impact of your eating habits. But focusing a little bit more on food in detail with sustainable diets, here is the Eat Well guide. If you've seen any of my other videos, you'll have noticed that I've used this before. This basically represents the food groups, the 5 main food groups in our diet, and the proportions that we need to eat over a day or a week. And this Eat Well guide is a public health resource tool and it gets updated every 5 to 10 years. And previous versions of this, the sugary foods and snacks that are outside on the left-hand side, they were actually part of the segment. Recently, they've been put out and left as discretionary foods to have on the side. They're not classed as a core food group anymore. And what's also new with this Eat Well guide is that the protein section in pink has more illustrations of plant-based proteins. So the idea is that we don't need to have meat and fish every day all the time, and that actually we do need to prioritise our plant-based proteins, so beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, soya, chickpea, all of those kind of things. Rely on them a bit more than we previously used to be our main source of protein. And ultimately that means, yes, if you are an omnivorous person, you love your meat, maybe trying to go for a meat-free Monday. But if you're already used to meat reducing, perhaps thinking about making all your lunches, say vegan or vegetarian, and then all your meals meat. So you've literally cut in half your meat consumption just by having the choice of lunch or dinner either being vegan or vegetarian or meat-based. Because really we only need 3 portions of red meat a week and a couple of portions of fish and chicken to meet our dietary needs. And we know that if we do reduce our intake to that amount, we could potentially reduce our carbon footprint by up to about 30 to 40% just by following these guidelines. Same with the dairy foods in blue there. They are now called dairy alternatives, so it does include plant milks and plant yogurts and some cheeses. I'd certainly say, if you've got a well-balanced diet, if you're a healthy person, it might be a good idea to start trying some of these as an alternative to dairy milk or yogurt. But be careful that if you're doing a complete swap, you will need to get fully fortified milks, so those that have vitamin D, B12, calcium and iodine, etc., so that you're not missing out on those essential nutrients. If oils and spreads take up such a tiny amount, they really only have a small contribution to the environmental impact, so I'm not going to spend too much time thinking about them today. But in terms of the complex carbohydrates, the starchy foods, in the UK, certainly things like potatoes and pasta and oats and porridge and couscous, because they're not animal-based foods, they've all got quite a low environmental footprint anyway. But one tip I like to give people is to try to rely less on rice, because this actually does have a bigger carbon footprint, environmental footprint than all the other carbohydrates. So diversifying your grains, maybe going for quinoa, better still British quinoa, going for things like teff and couscous and all of those kind of things instead of rice can be a really good idea. In terms of the fruit and vegetables, yes, if you can, eat seasonally, because that would then support the local farmers in the UK, and because we rely quite a lot on imports. But at the same time, I think really the main key message here is that try not to get any fruits or vegetables that are highly perishable and flown in by air freight, so flown in by planes, because that has a really environmental load. Often sort of tougher fruit and vegetables, if they have been imported, come by ship and they have a much lower carbon footprint. So you will find things like butternut squash or bananas or pineapples. Okay, they've travelled a long way, but they've come along on a very low carbon route, so they're not too bad. So yes, anything that's like berries or strawberries or green beans that have just been flown in from Kenya, you can see would have a higher environmental footprint than others. The sweets and crisps and even alcohol, fruit juices, all of those kind of things, they will have an environmental footprint associated with them, even if it is just to do with the packaging. I think the main thing to remember here is these are calories, but they're what we call empty calories. So they're not even giving us any nutritive value, but they are creating an environmental footprint. So basically what this guide is saying is, by sheer nature of healthy eating, if you follow the model, you're going to reduce your carbon footprint and you're going to inherently be quite healthy as well. So here are some ideas of how you could apply the ideas in Eat Well Plate to practice. So looking at breakfast, for example, crunchy nut cornflakes and milk, get the sugar down, switch to something like bran flakes. Instead of having dairy milk, have a fortified plant milk. And instead of having sugar, maybe have berries or seeds if you have them to hand. That will give you extra vitamin C, extra fibre, and all sorts of minerals like vitamin E and selenium from the seeds. If you were looking for a cooked breakfast, instead of having it being meat heavy and fried with white bread and butter, you could have smaller amounts of the meat, bump up the veggie parts, so the mushrooms and the beans, and have whole grain toast with a little bit of low fat spread on it. At lunch, what would this mean? Instead of having a meat soup with a roll, you could have a lentil soup with a wholemeal roll. Or instead of having a big white cheesy baguette with just lots of cheese and mayonnaise, you could have a smaller version of it with a little bit less cheese, but lots of salad or vegetable stuff to sort of really bulk it out, so that you're not relying too much on the cheese for the filling, because cheese has quite a high environmental footprint being an animal product. Then for dinner, you could do a simple swap. So again, instead of having chicken tikka masala with a large portion of rice, you could swap to a vegetable and bean or lentil-based tomato curry with a moderate portion of brown or whole grain rice, even better, some kind of quinoa or couscous. And what you can do is you can also adapt meat recipes to be lower in meat and higher in vegetables. So for example, a classic meat recipe like spaghetti bolognese, which is just generally meat sauce and pasta, could be swapped. So you replace half the meat with lentils. So you have a lentil and say beef spaghetti sauce, and then some wholemeal spaghetti with lots of veggies or side salad with it. So we've gone into a little bit of detail about what healthy and sustainable eating is, but this quote has been widely used by many people, giving this message out, and it's by an author called Michael Pollan, and it's a very famous saying, and it basically says, eat whole foods, not too much, and mostly plants, which basically means keep off the very, very processed foods, keep your portion sizes moderate. You don't need to cut out all the animal and dairy, but just try and make sure that most of your diet is plant-based. And that way you'll be both healthy and sustainable.